beaming to you from the bosom of America every Sunday night between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern Time at tabootopics.life/shows. On each episode of Taboo Topics, our panelists, all experts in their fields, share news articles about paranormal events, conspiracies, and other hush-hush subjects to shed light on the darkness coming from the government and mainstream media. The newsbringer gives feedback before inviting discussion from the other panelists. And on today's show, I am thrilled to welcome our guest panelists in alphabetical order. We have Preston Dennett, accountant by day, prolific author by night. We have Mary Rodwell, renowned Australian UFO pioneer specializing in hypnotherapy. And we have Ginger Routh, paranormal event organizer extraordinaire. Preston, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been investigating UFOs since, 1988, a long time. Written over 100 articles and 26 books, and still going strong. I'm very passionate about this subject. People within my family and certainly friends and coworkers had very profound experiences, which is how I got involved. I was initially skeptical. Have had a number of my own experiences. So yeah, I think this is a very important subject, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And next, let's hear from Mary Rodwell, all the way from Australia.
Well, I'm principal of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, and this was really instigated by the very first person that came to see me that said, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're crazy. And I found the gentleman very articulate and very grounded, but also what worried me for him was that he felt he had nowhere to go because his whole family were having experiences. So after 25 years, 3,500 individuals, families and children that have spoken to me about their experiences, for me, it is one of the most profound research that anyone can do, because for me, as a, my background's nursing midwifery. I've come from a very scientific background, but I've also been counseling for 35 years, and one knows when someone is authentic. One knows when somebody's speaking their truth. And for me, it has been the most profound waking up to the fact we're multidimensional and we are connected to these galactic beings.
Wow. Can't wait to hear your article. Ginger Routh, tell us all about yourself.
Hi, Jean. Thanks for having me. And as you know, I do something that's a little old-fashioned. I host in-person meeting groups. So we have to get in our car and drive and arrive at the same place and talk and discuss and meet each other. We meet monthly, and I feel that I kind of do service to the group by choosing speakers and topics with their input, and then put out the word on, we have an informal website and an email list. So I've been doing that since 2009 in the St. Louis area. We usually have 15 to 20 people a month at our group, and a lot of times it's the same people. And I kind of joke around with my friends that we talk about the taboo topics in amongst each other that we can't talk about with our regular friends. So I feel like in the group, I'm a little bit of the skeptical person, but outside the group with my regular friends, I'm the wacko. And we started out in 2009 as a couple of fans of the radio program Coast to Coast AM. So obviously I'm a big fan of Preston Dennett, have heard him on Coast to Coast many times. Really excited to be with both Preston and Mary and Eugene. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being on the show, Taboo Topics with Jean Broida, and I am your host, Jean Broida. I'm a lifelong UFO researcher, as most of us, I think, are, both in the studio and out in the audience. I'm a parapsychologist. I'm author of the book Unknown Objects, the Top 10 U.S. UFO Cases. And you can read that to find out why you must be crazy not to believe in UFOs and their alien occupants. I'm an avid news hound, with advanced degrees in computer science, psychology, and education. And I'm also a practicing mystic. And I'm joining a growing number of truth seekers and starseeds who are waking up to the emotional impact that sweeping official cover-ups have on both individuals and society. We certainly live in remarkable times as light workers are awakening to universal truths in numbers never before seen on Earth. And all of us gathered here today hope you'll enjoy today's show as we explore more taboo topics with you. And now let's begin talking about taboo topics. I'm thrilled to lead off with a juicy news article. This is one that I wrote for the dailyconspiracy.com. I've been writing for a little over a year and a half for this publication. I write as Lightworker 111, Lightworker for people who shed light in dark places, and 111 for synchronicity. I know there's a lot of people out there who see ones on digital displays or other numeric arrays, 121s, 333s. It's a tribute to synchronicity, that which brings us all together, seemingly by accident, but we know better. So what I'd like to share with you is one of the first stories that I covered in depth, and it's also a chapter in my book, Unknown Objects. The title of this article is UFO Abductions, Fact or Fiction? And this is the Betty and Barney Hill story. This is very famous for anyone who's into UFO stuff, but let's take a walk down memory lane. Unless you're an extremely rare breed of reader, you've undoubtedly seen tabloid headlines, History Channel shows, or online accounts by everyday people who claim to have been abducted by ETs, extraterrestrials, in UFOs, unidentified flying objects. So you probably wouldn't do much more than raise an eyebrow if you saw this headline over your morning latte. UFO chiller. Did they seize couple? But when I wrote this article, it was 2017. Now it's 2020. Let's go back in time to October 25th, 1965, when page 3 of the Boston Traveler newspaper ran the above header. In 1965, the soundtrack to the musical hit Mary Poppins, starring Julie Andrews, made Billboard's #1 album of the year. There were only 3 major television station networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. We got our news from Walter Cronkite and our jokes from Johnny Carson. Our TV sets were probably black and white and got lousy reception with either rooftop or wire antennas we called rabbit ears and fussed around with to sharpen the grainy image and regain the vertical hold. We, the people, had one phone company, Ma Bell, the Bell telephone system. Cell phones? Personal computers? Forget about it. The fax machine hadn't even been dreamed up yet. In the first 5 years of the 1960s, nobody had heard much of anything about UFO abductions in the mainstream media. The 1947 Roswell crash had been denied and covered up by the military. But other than a few niche publications like Flying Saucer Review, published quarterly since 1955, ETs and UFOs were not hot topics around the water cooler at work. So imagine the heightened public reaction when details emerged about a New Hampshire couple's encounter with a UFO. It was like a real-life episode of The Twilight Zone. As reported, on September 19th, 1961, Barney and Betty Hill, a married middle-class couple, were driving south through woodlands on US Route 3 from Canada toward their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. At about 10:15 p.m., Betty noticed a bright light in the sky, which she pointed out to Barney. She commented, that the light did not behave like any airplane she had ever seen. Betty told Barney, half jokingly, that she was going to call a UFO just for fun. But Barney was not amused. He told her not to, but Betty went ahead and concentrated on communicating with a UFO. To get a better look at the brightening object, Barney pulled the car over into a picnic area, and Betty got his binoculars from the glove compartment. She looked through them, and to her surprise, the light was a circular craft with flashing multicolored lights. Barney got his gun out of the trunk, and the two continued to observe the craft as it darted around. Then it zoomed toward them. Both Hills jumped into their car, and Barney drove slowly away so they could watch the craft's uneven motions. Not far away, on a lonely stretch of forested side road, the craft swooped in low, noiselessly, above and in front of the Hills' car. Barney stopped the car, pocketed his gun, grabbed the binoculars, got out of the car, looked up, and could see a small group of occupants staring down at him. They seemed to be wearing uniforms, like Nazis, Barney later said. And one of them telepathed to Barney, "Stay where you are and keep looking." Completely spooked and fearing for his life, sensing that these beings meant only harm and not good, Barney broke his gaze, hustled back to the car, and drove away at high speed. Betty kept watch on the UFO, which had disappeared. However, she couldn't see any stars above their speeding car, even though the night was clear with a crescent moon. The Hills then heard a rhythmic sound drumming on the trunk of their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. The sound repeated, and both realized they were traveling 35 miles south of where they had just been. The Hills made it home safely, but exhausted. Their watches were broken. They had lost 2 hours of time, and Betty's dress had a strange pink substance on it. When they woke up the next day, Betty's sister told her to report the event to Pease Air Force Base. Major Paul W. Henderson filed a report with the Air Force's Project Blue Book, UFO investigation, and that confirmed the UFO sighting on military radar. It wasn't long, only a few weeks after this event, that both Betty and Barney began remembering nightmares. They finally sought relief through regressive hypnosis with renowned psychiatrist and neurologist Dr. Benjamin Simon. Both told the same story under hypnosis, at times weeping and fearful, the story we know today as classic UFO abduction. In its day, however, this was the first widely publicized UFO abduction case in the United States. As revealed under hypnosis, after hearing the rhythmic sound drumming on the trunk of their car, the UFO hovered near the Hills, who were sitting in their car with the engine turned off. Several occupants appeared from the craft and gathered in the road. Two groups of luminous ETs approached the car, one to levitate Betty and one for Barney, took them to their waiting craft, performed some sometimes painful physical exams, including collecting ova and sperm, and then released them unharmed back to their car. Betty stated that while waiting for the ETs to complete Barney's exam, she chatted with the leader and asked him where they were from. According to Betty, the leader showed her a three-dimensional holographic kind of star map, which hovered in front of her. And after that particular hypnotic session, and 6 years before astronomers discovered it, Betty drew a 2D, two-dimensional on paper, star map, which appears to match the binary star system of Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2. Betty asked the leader for a book she could take as a souvenir and proof of their encounter. The leader gave her a book to hold while on board, but took it back, before the Hills were escorted off the craft. So now, welcome back to 2020. Taken at face value, assuming the Hills were telling the truth, there are many interesting aspects to this first reported UFO abduction case. Among them, did Betty actually summon a UFO by communicating telepathically with its audience, with its occupants, I should say? Also, the Hills were an interracial couple at a time when this was not common in our society. He was Black, she was white. Was this of particular interest to the ETs? And finally, Betty recounted that during her physical examination, an ET rushed in excitedly and tugged on her teeth until she cried out in pain. Barney's false teeth were the cause of this scene. The ET wanted to know why Betty's teeth wouldn't come out like her husband's. So they are smart, but not that smart? If, however, the Hills were not telling the truth, were they merely publicity hounds seeking their 15 minutes of fame? Many critics have accused Betty Hill of embellishing and even changing details of her story. The Hill UFO abduction case did produce the 1966 bestseller, The Interrupted Journey, and a 1975 made-for-television movie, The UFO Incident. Barney Hill did not live long enough to enjoy his newfound celebrity. The stresses of his daily life, plus those added from the Zeta Reticuli incident, as it came to be called, are thought to have led to Barney's early death at age 46, when, in 1969, he died of a sudden stroke. Betty Hill spent the rest of her long life touring the ufology circuit as a speaker and experiencer. Her notoriety remained stellar, even as her credibility waned in later years. And the second witness to the first famous U.S. UFO case, Betty Hill, died from cancer at age 85 in 2004. From the Hill abduction in the 1960s to the present day, alien abduction stories continue, and continue to get almost no serious mainstream media coverage. What do these human abduction stories mean to our society? How do they impact our ancestral past, our collective future? We may never know the truth behind the Hill abduction, but do you believe? And just before I pass the torch around to other panelists here, I do want to say that having researched Betty and Barney Hill for my book, I know they were not publicity hounds. They were nowhere looking for their story to go public at all. This story was leaked in Europe somehow. European press started to blow it up, and overnight it got to the East Coast of the United States. A friend of the Hills awakened them, something like 4 in the morning, if memory serves, and tipped them off. Their first reaction was, I'd better tell my boss I don't want to get fired. Barney worked for the post office in New Hampshire, in the Portsmouth area, and Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. So these people were civil rights workers, very credible in their community. And this whole story was infamous and famous. Who I ask you among us has not heard of Betty and Barney Hill? What do you think, Ginger?
Wow. Great job explaining it. It's been one of my favorites, probably it's kind of like the gateway case to ufology if you're a lay person like I was before I got into all this. I believe them. I like to hear Betty's niece, Kathleen Madigan, talk, and I don't have any reason not to believe them. I don't know what happened to them, but I think over the years, their stories has definitely held up.
Yes, Kathleen Martin. Betty's niece has spent a lifetime researching the case, of course, with Stanton Friedman as well, now deceased. And what about yourself, Ginger? Have you had any close encounter experiences?
I have not. I'm not an experiencer, but I'm a seeker. I really want to know. I find myself, always curious and wanting to meet people who have been, have had experiences.
Now, Mary, I have a feeling you're going to kick in on this. So take it away.
Look, for me, there's no question they were genuine. They were telling their story. They had no reason at any point to make this up. I mean, it's an extraordinary story. And to be honest, if somebody says, well, you know, they're doing it for publicity, it's not the kind of publicity an experiencer wants at any point. I have met, as you know, and talked to hundreds of thousands of those having experiences, and most of the time they are not in the least interested in publicity. They're coming to me because it's something that is part of their life. It has been life-changing. They want to understand it, and they certainly are not expecting me to make them famous. In fact, as I say, the last thing that they want is publicity, because they don't want to be mocked or derided, which we all know is part of what happens for most that have these kinds of experiences. So for me, the question of whether they're authentic or not is moot, because at the end of the day, I have no problem with accepting that. The thing is, now look at how many years on. We're now in the 2020, and any researcher that's been working in this field, like Preston, for example, I mean, 25 years myself, Preston even longer, ultimately we are seeing and hearing the same patterns of experience from hundreds of thousands of people globally. This is not just America or England or whatever. It's South America, it's Africa, it's Russia, it's China. This is a global phenomena, and the patterns of experience we're finding time and time again, same kinds of things, except for what I'd like to add that we've discovered in recent years is there are many ways you can have encounters, and not necessarily through being picked up by a craft. We have discovered that you may have encounters with non-human intelligences by having an out-of-body experience. You may have it through a shamanic experience, a healing experience, learning healing or whatever. Spiritual practices, you can end up having these experiences. So there's a whole range of ways we tap into the dimensions where these intelligences are part of. And we're also talking about not just physical, we're talking about interdimensionals, extra-dimensionals, trans-dimensionals, visitors from our future. We've got a whole range of intelligences that are interacting with us in various levels of consciousness. And the other thing I know that Preston is very aware of, because he's been part of the free organization and the book Beyond UFOs, where he will no doubt go into that. We have discovered the interesting fact that makes it even harder for nuts and bolts ufologists is that we've discovered with 4,200 people and the surveys that we've done, in fact, that 25% only is physical and 75% is out of body. And so that makes it even harder to give it a 3D quantifiable aspect, because how can you make that real unless you look at the outcomes of the encounter? And that, I'm sure Preston will go into in terms of the healing, but also where I've been exploring is the outcomes of contact show it's a reality, because people change profoundly after these experiences in ways that will never be related to a hallucination or a fantasy. And I also will talk a little bit about what I feel is very much part of the agenda, which is upgrading or awakening of human consciousness.
Excellent. Can't wait. So looking forward. Preston, take it away.
Yeah, wow, Mary, I'm resonating with everything you're saying. It's really great to hear it. But yeah, the Betty and Barney Hill case, what a case. I think it's a testament to their character, really, that they're the first that broke through a wall of skepticism within the media, and let's face it, an active cover-up from our government, which is still active. So kudos to them for sure. There was a lot of cases happening at that time. So it's kind of, hit or miss who was going to be first. Following on the heels of them was another case in upstate New York to two brothers, Jim and Cora Lorenzen. Their book on UFO abductions was published right on the heels of John Fuller's book on Betty and Barney Hill. So this was a phenomena whose time had come to be recognized. It looks, what I find most interesting about it, in the Hill case in particular, is looks like a historically unprecedented thing in human history. yeah, we have years, thousands of years of alien visitations, extraterrestrial visitations, but nothing like this, not in these numbers, not with large numbers of people being taken on board. The Hill case shows definitely an interest in physical examinations, the single most common thing I hear. I'm fascinated by the confusion they had with the false teeth, because we do see that in other cases where ETs are interested in physical abnormalities. It's a question I've learned to ask. I've had people say, oh, yeah, I do have, things strange about me. A couple of people told me I have an extra vertebrae in my spine. So that's turned up a number of times. So there's definitely something to that. So yeah, the Hill case is the watershed event that broke this wide open, changed the course of human history. And now we all know, I think, that UFO abductions are a real phenomena, or at least we've certainly heard of them. Yeah, it's still a taboo subject. I can clear a room, but this is breaking into the mainstream. The Hill case really helped do that, and I'm excited about how this is all going to roll out. I don't think it's a negative phenomenon, though it can be very scary. And really, ET behavior falls under the same umbrella as human behavior. There are some cases that are not so pleasant, but for the most part, I think that we're dealing with a phenomena that is going to involve a lot of, as Mary said, human transformation. That's the pattern I see.
For viewers who are not familiar with all of your work, Preston, how many books do you have to your name now?
26 books. My latest was Schoolyard UFO Encounters, which is what I call UFO attractors, or attracted certain areas, and also The Healing Power of UFOs, 300 true cases. So yeah, I'm not saying all ETs are our friends by any means, but I can tell you conclusively, without any doubt, and back it up with pretty much solid proof, that one of their main agendas is the healing of humanity. For sure.
Well, that's actually encouraging. What I was going to ask about, since you have talked to so many people who are experiencers, and you as well, Mary, this one element that keeps coming up, they seem related, this buzzing sound that people get in their heads. In the Hills case, it was inside their car. Whatever was drumming on the trunk was seeming to vibrate the whole car, and it was getting into their head as well. And that sound persisted hours, maybe days afterwards. It's just a sensation as much as anything, frequency. And that seems to be linked somehow with telepathy or hypnosis. Any comments on those elements of abduction based on case histories?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. That's something I hear frequently from experiencers. Just recently, I was interviewing a lady who moved from the East Coast back to the West Coast. She's had a number of experiences her whole life and suffers from what they thought was tinnitus. Same thing from another gentleman, a Marine officer, ringing in his ears. He says he believes it's related to an implant. So does this other witness. So do most of the witnesses I've talked to. And they say sometimes these things will go off at certain events, certain patterns. For one guy, Ramon, he says his implant goes off whenever he's watching a major news story, some world event or something important. And he feels like the ETs are monitoring him and his emotional reaction to it, which certainly corroborates what this other lady I'm interviewing says. She says whenever she is in a romantic situation, whenever she feels any kind of emotion towards her husband, this thing will go off. She says it's very annoying. She's had a lot of problems with it. Both of these people have been to doctors. So yeah, I think this is probably related to implants, probably related to how ETs communicate with people. I don't think the implants are a negative thing. I've had experiencers talk to ETs and been told that the purpose for implants is to boost the immune system, monitor vital signs, and things like this. So I think it's all good for the most part.
Ginger, what do you know about buzzing, implants, anything to toss in? Have you talked to people who are experiencers?
I have talked to people who are experiencers, but the person I'm thinking of with an implant just finds it confusing, doesn't view it as positive or negative.
Okay, fair enough. Mary, any final thoughts before we pass the torch on to the next article reader?
Well, I've done a whole chapter on implants in my book Awakening, and interestingly, there's a whole range of interpretations, just as Preston was talking about. Certainly, one of the young ladies is coming through her from these intelligences. There's an implant in her arm that helps her with that frequency of bringing it actually in. And so there are some that we believe are connected to the military, which are not, they're not positive, but on the whole, the ones that seem to be either physical or energetic from these non-human intelligences seem to be in some ways supporting the immune system or supporting their connection to these intelligences, just as Preston was mentioning.
Interesting, really interesting. You know, the more you get into this topic, the more fascinating certain aspects become and patterns do emerge. It's a shame, really, that we've not spent the last 70 years, we as a society have not spent the last 70 years studying the phenomenon seriously. And hats off to all researchers who have been studying this phenomenon seriously. It's just amazing. Well, with that said, Ginger, are you ready to thrill us with some taboo topic of your choosing?
I hope it's okay with the group here, but my topic is a non-UFO related article.
Ginger Routh, take it away.
Okay, you can hear me fine, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, here's what I have, guys. Now, Jean suggested that we pick a topic that we feel passionate about. So this is something I've spent a lot of time studying and I'm really interested in. And the reason it's taboo is because this theory can't really be proven. And this is along the lines of a sociological or the way society forms type of theory. So if you're not familiar already, I'm going to introduce you to a guy by the name of Neil Howe. Neil Howe is a researcher on generations and generational changes that happen to society due to the values and thoughts and pushes of a generation. He's been on Coast to Coast many times, and the reason that he gained a little even more notoriety is the book he's the most famous for is called The Fourth Turning. So I have here, if I can just do a little screen share, I'm gonna share my